It's scaring the shit out of all of us. So this is my trigger warning, because what we're going to be talking about is the capitalist Hydra, the storm, and the cracks. And as I'll show in a little bit, the storm is climate change, which can be a very, very heavy, traumatic, paralyzing topic, but this might be the best kind of place to have it when we're like in organizing mode. So that's the trigger warning for today. So I'll begin by talking about this. This is the Zapatista's webpage, Enlace Zapatista. If you're ever interested in following what they do, they put on events all of the time, and they're always putting out communiques. And the one that I'm on is the communique for the storm, the sentinel, and the night watch syndrome. And you notice that there's translations in English, French, Italian, and German. Here's the English one. And I begin with this one because in 2015, the Zapatistas held a seminar. This is the invitation to the seminar, called Critical Thought in the Face of the Capitalist Hydra. And what they said was that in this time of capitalism's transformations, we need to be really vigilant as to how capitalism is transforming, because it might look a bit different from what we're used to. And they put out also the idea of the capitalist Hydra, which is a mythical figure from the story of Hercules, Greek mythology. Hercules was given 12 labors, and one of them was to kill a Hydra. And the Hydra was a beast that had many heads. Hercules would cut one off, and then another one would grow. He'd cut it off, and another one would grow. And Hercules' nephew, Iolaus, was watching and noticed what was going on. So what he did was, when Hercules cut the head off of the beast, he would cauterize the wound to prevent that. And what the Zapatistas want to show us with that metaphor is that in addition to practice, which is that fight, that active fight, like Hercules symbolizes, we also need critical thought, which is the role of Iolaus, the nephew, who recognized what was going on. And so, with that, when they talk about the capitalist Hydra, it's precisely that. The Zapatistas want to suggest that capitalism, we've been told that it's just going to fall by its own weight, its own contradictions, but it ends up just becoming stronger and changing. And so then we need to be vigilant as to how that happens, and as it's changing, let everybody know. And so this is where critical thought comes in. The role of the critical thinker, of the analyst, is to be like a sentinel, taking the post at the night watch to see what the enemy is doing and report back. And it's really important that they keep healthy and that they take shifts, because what can happen is that after seeing the same image after a while, sometimes our minds get tricked into thinking that, yeah, it is the same image, and so then we fall into this loop of repetitive images, and then fall into what they call the night watch syndrome, which is us just thinking that the beast, the enemy, is exactly as it used to be. And so then, and this has something that has happened to the Zapatistas military, and so they've witnessed it there. And so then they've asked that we not fall into that. They feel that a lot of our analysts have, telling us that the beast is the same that it was 20, 40, 100 years ago. Or not even really watching out there, but already having like a doctrine. So they're priests of doctrine telling us what's going on, judging us to see if we're doing things right, absolving us if we ask for their forgiveness. And so then they notice that this is a problem that we have among the left. So this was their intervention. They held a seminar called Capitalist Thought in the face of the Critical Thought in the Face of the Capitalist Hydra. They held it in May of 2015. And if you go to this website called radiozapatista.org, they have the audios there, and they have the English transcription. It's a very beautiful site by a compañero Alejandro, who actually studied at Berkeley, and he lives in Chiapas now. And so please take note of that. We'll upload these slides to our website, along with the slides of the previous compas presentations. So you don't have to furiously take notes. There's also a book that came out, and it's also translated into English, Critical Thought in the Face of the Capitalist Hydra. It was published by the compas Quilombo in North Carolina, and published through their press, Paperboat Press, and it's distributed through AK Press. You can get it online as well. And what does Zapatistas say about the capitalist hydra? It's really just them asking us to think about if we agree that capitalism is a hydra, or if we think that it's just one thing. If it is a hydra, what do we think that the heads are? Are the heads the media? Previously, like legitimacy would come from religion and then philosophy, and in many ways now the mass media. Do we think that the different heads are states, the United States, China, these inter-imperial rivalries? What do we think that they are? Are they a mix of things? Is there one main head? They don't really give us these answers. They're asking us to think this through and be critical thinkers wherever it is that we live. It's really cool to be in this room right now, because when I give this talk, I show this piece of art, which is an artistic rendering of the Hydra. On the top, it shows a television screen telling you about all of these projects that the state will give you, these handouts, and then there's social media, like the mirror of narcissism and self-esteem, and then the banks, and then alcoholism, and the military. And if you look over in that corner, that artwork is right there. That's part of the comparte art that we were talking about, that's available to travel to your geographies. And we have compas that you can sign up with. So then now, we had a compa earlier today suggest that we need to talk about what capitalism is, we need to study it. And that's precisely what the book, Critical Thought in the Face of the Capitalist Hydra, also suggests. And they suggest, the Zapatistas suggest, that we go back and read our Marx. Many of us haven't read our Marx, and some of us confuse Marx with Marxism. And so then what they do, they recognize that what Marx was providing was a critique of capital. And thinking about what a critique is, or what critical thinking is, one definition could be that critical thinking is really just exposing the assumptions in any argument. And so when I do a lot of popular education in Oxnard, and we read a lot of Marx, and we read volume 1, several parts out loud, line by line, to try to understand what it said, and we made a lot of use of the autonomous Marxist Harry Cleaver, who has a study guide to capital online. If you just Google his name, you'll find that. And an example that we've come up with there to try to, in a very lay way, talk about what capitalism is just a very simple example. One, let's say that I make pencils and you make paper, and one day we encounter each other and we want to conduct an exchange. And so under capitalism, we would exchange by saying, well, how long did it take you to make a ream of paper? An hour. Okay, it took me an hour to make 5 pencils. So then I exchanged 5 pencils for a ream of paper, and we conducted our exchange. There are some assumptions there. One is that you and I are property owners. I own those pencils, you own that paper. 2, you and I are equals. Your hour is equal to my hour. 3, you and I have engaged in a contract. It was a consensual relationship. I'm not going to call the cops and say that you stole from me or anything like that. So here are some very important assumptions. I don't know if you can see that, but here is property equality contracts. But there's an even bigger assumption, and that is something that we can get at by asking, well, what about the tree? Did we ask the tree for consent? Did the tree get into a contract with us? Are we equals with the tree? Like, how about the tree's labor time? Is it equal to our labor time? Is the tree a property owner? And we quickly realized that no. And if we were to actually do that kind of accounting, how impossible it would be, because in order to produce a tree, we need to also compensate not just the tree, but also the soil microbes and the water and the wind that pollinated the tree, or the squirrel that hid the acorn and forgot about it, and from it a tree sprouted. There's a lot of work that goes into producing the world, and what capitalism does is it tries to extract profit out of it, and it does that by minimizing the number of folks, entities that it needs to compensate. And certainly, like, it is true that under capitalism, likely we wouldn't even have access to that tree, because we'd really just be workers for somebody else who has access to that tree, what they call the means of production. But it does still stand that as workers, waged workers, that we get compensated, and that we are property owners of our own labor, and that we have rights. And this has, of course, been through struggle. So then what we actually see is that while a lot of Marxist movements have understood the main contradiction of the world to be a fight between the worker and the capitalist, there's a bigger assumption there that we get at. In order to engage in this relation, one needs to be understood as human. Because again, that tree, we're just extracting from it, we're exploiting it, we're destroying it. And so what falls then under the non-human? Well, Mother Earth. We also have the figure of the slave, the structural position of the slave. The slave does not own their own labor. They're not property owners of their labor. They also are not in a consensual contract at all. They're forced through violence. And they are not afforded equal rights. So then through that, like, this is just a kind of like a basis for trying to have conversations about capitalism. You can completely disagree with it. I welcome you to challenge it, to add on to whatever. But this then allows us to see, we have this massive division between the human and the non-human. And the Zapatistas in their seminar, Critical Thought Against the Capitalist Hydra, mentioned to us that from their night watch posts, they see a storm coming. And they want to know if we see it too. And this storm, they said, is like no other. And this is from a movement that is a product of 500 years of struggle and understands what a storm already is. But they're saying, yes, we've been living a storm, and we're going to see another one. After the seminar, they detailed this a little bit more, what they meant. And they recommended that we all read a book called Collapse, which is currently only in Spanish, by Carlos Taibo, who's a Spanish writer, a writer from Spain. And in that book, Carlos Taibo talks about two basic things that we need to really pay attention to. This is his analysis of the storm. One is that with the majority of the world's population now living in cities, cities are powered by fossil fuels and are so vulnerable to fossil fuels being scarce that entire cities can collapse with a scarcity of fossil fuels, which we're about to see. Two is climate change, which is connected to that. Climate change, any scientist will tell you that the climate has been changing over the last 150 years, which was like the start of the Industrial Revolution. It's been really increased, the temperature of the globe has been increasing, and the correlation is the Industrial Revolution. And what that means is the Industrial Revolution brought about the burning of a lot of fossil fuels and coal. And what that does is it sends out into the atmosphere carbon. Now, carbon is something that exists throughout all of planet Earth. It exists within you and me. It's actually really great. It's what allows for life to take place. But the majority of carbon on Earth is in the soil. And in many ways, petroleum has a lot of carbon, and so then when it's burnt, carbon then gets released into the atmosphere, and it connects with oxygen, and it creates carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide is actually pretty cool, but in certain amounts. And so you might have heard about the greenhouse effect. Now this is a greenhouse. If you have a backyard, a garden, maybe you have a greenhouse. Greenhouses are used by farms, by gardens, in order to allow plants to be warmer. So if you want to start your tomato plants, like in February, you can start them in your greenhouse, and the tomato plants will think that they're in Mexico where they're native to. And you kind of trick them. And then when it gets hot enough, then you can transfer them outside and they can grow. The way that the greenhouse works is either through plastic or through glass, and what it does is it traps heat from outside inside. And in many ways, that's the way our Earth works. Earth receives radiation from the sun, and it keeps some of it. It sends a lot of it out, but it keeps some of it. So like the moon, for example, doesn't keep a lot of it. It has a very different atmosphere than we do, so the moon is very cold. If Earth didn't trap heat, if it didn't already have this greenhouse effect, we wouldn't be able to live. But what ends up happening is that when we shoot out carbon into the atmosphere, it becomes carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas. There are several greenhouse gases, but the key one in many ways is carbon dioxide. What ends up happening is that we shoot out way too much, and it then insulates the Earth even more than what we've evolved into being able to live under. So what we're seeing, and maybe you've been hearing, who here has heard of like climate change in the news a lot more recently than when you were little? Raise your hand. We're hearing more and more and more about it, and what we're seeing is ice melting. Maybe you've heard that when the ice caps in the North and in the South Pole melt, it then causes the Earth to become even warmer because white reflects heat. It sends heat back. It's like when you wear a white shirt outside, it reflects heat back than when you wear like a black shirt that then draws it in. But then when ice is melting in the ice caps, then we lose that reflective power, and then Earth starts warming more. So there's a lot of like feedback loops that start to arise out of this. And in Antarctica, this is February 7th of this year, 2020, it logged its hottest temperature on record. And then February 13th, it did it again. In 2 weeks, it broke the temperature record. Now I'm about to show you some maps of some of the consequences of this. A big one is sea level rise. Sea level rises for two reasons. One, when water heats up, physically, it just expands. So when water is warm, the oceans are warm, they expand. Two, when the glaciers melt, they will then melt into the ocean, rising the sea levels. There is a website that you can go to. Now, I'm not going to tell you when the sea level is going to rise, at what time. There's a whole debate. But I do suggest that you do your reading, and as you do your reading, you'll probably recognize a pattern. And the pattern is that things are happening a lot faster than anybody thought. There's never been a moment when a climate scientist was like, oh look, that slowed down. No, it's really difficult to read the news about this every day because there's always something worse. ClimateCentral.org. This is sea level rise of 10 feet, and it always starts in Manhattan because I guess Manhattan, New York is like the most important part of the world. Well, New York is actually the city in the United States that's prepared a little bit. They're not very prepared, but they're the most prepared, which isn't very much. And you notice that New Jersey is underwater, the coast of New Jersey. And if you follow the news around Hurricane or Superstorm Sandy in 2012, then you saw that a lot of the New Jersey shore disappeared. There are houses right now that are falling into the ocean in North Carolina and Virginia, and the climate scientists are talking about, we need to retreat from the coasts now. But what's happening in places like Miami, Florida, which is flooding on sunny days, they have sunny day flooding, where the ocean water is now coming up through the sewers on the streets. They keep developing. There's a lot of denial. Well, there's a lot of money to be made from real estate speculation from a public that doesn't pay attention. Here's New York. Here's Oakland. Here's Sacramento. Here's where I'm from. My entire childhood will disappear. Fort Wainimi, there are 2 naval bases there. And they're gonna drown. The military is the US military is completely freaked out. They are not climate change deniers at all. In 2006, the US military every 4 years does a report about the biggest threats in the world, and in 2006 it was terrorism. In 2010 it changed to climate change. They're freaked out, not only because their naval bases are drowning, but also because as understanding themselves as the world's police of law and order, they're not going to be able to handle all of this chaos. And again, the military isn't there to protect our lives, it's there to protect order. So whatever that means. Here we have compas from Mexicali. Mexicali on the border of California, in Baja California, will now connect to the Salton Sea. And of course, there are islands already disappearing. Here's Micronesia. It's already losing islands. And there's this whole debate with the United Nations and all of these governments over, well, how hot can we allow it to get? Well, it depends on what you value. And it looks like they don't value the low-lying islands around the world because they're okay with letting them completely disappear. And this is happening in the Maldives, for example. And something that is, so sea level rise is not the only thing that the storm is bringing. It also brings something called ecofascism, which is the idea of, yes, we need to protect Mother Earth, but for whom? Right? For a very small number of folks. So when you hear this narrative of overpopulation, this is code for putting the blame on people rather than on capitalism. PM Press has an edited book there called Anthropocene or Capitalocene. Anthropocene is this whole idea that humans are causing this and it's changing the geology of the earth. Except that if you recognize when this has happened, it's actually under capitalism. So there's like this push to change that language. Actually, because it's not all humans who've done this, it's a certain civilization. The El Paso shooter in Texas, I don't know if you read his manifesto. I suggest you read it and like clutch at whatever you need to heal you as you're reading it. But it's that. He's talking about climate change, ecological disaster, catastrophe, and putting the blame on migrants. The New Zealand shooter did the same thing. And actually the New Zealand shooter used this term eco-fascism. So here in Mother Jones, it says the El Paso shooter blamed immigrants for hastening the environmental destruction of the United States and proposed genocide as a pathway to ecological sustainability. Carlos Taibo's book, Collapse, the subtitle has a question for us. Are we gonna head to eco-fascism or are we gonna head to eco-socialism? The idea that we're going to share this world together, however it is that we're going to share it, but share it. We also have a lot of folks paying attention and preparing. In the New Yorker in 2017, there's an article that you can read, it's open, it's called Doomsday Prep for the Super Rich. And what it looks like is that it's the wealthy that are planning their survival and not really caring about anybody else. And again, it's not only that, it's not only just eco-fascism. As ice thaws, there are cadavers in the ice frozen for thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of years that have viruses that will be released, that are being released into the water that we do not have immunity to. This already happened in Siberia. A reindeer, the soil ice melted, the permafrost, and it released an old cadaver of a reindeer, and it infected a community with anthrax, killing a 12-year-old boy. As the earth becomes less and less inhabitable, we are projected to see by 2050 climate migrants numbering 1 billion. In Central America, south of Mexico, for geographers, Mexico is part of North America. So Central America, Guatemala, all the way to Panama. Central America is known as ground zero for climate change in this continent because of the dry corridor. Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, Nicaragua. We've been hearing a lot of migration coming from, or on the news coming from Central America in recent years. It hasn't rained in many regions for 3 years in a row, which is then causing people to not be able to eat. They migrate into the cities, they can't find work, they're desperate, they're coming up. Up until last month, there had not been a category by international law on climate refugee, so people weren't calling themselves that, but increasingly will call themselves that. So then, of course, the United States knows about this. The concejala Bettina will talk to us more about this, but López Obrador and Trump are working together really closely to prevent migration to the United States. And the migration they're talking about is Central American migration. And the way that's going to happen, when Trump says that Mexico is going to pay for the wall is Mexico. There is a mega project that our compañera Bettina will tell us more about tonight. The Trans-Isthmic Corridor, which is a massive high-speed rail to go between the oceans in order to move merchandise. And it's going to serve as a border. Mexico's new southern border will be that. And what we're seeing, this is just one example. In 1989, when the Berlin Wall fell and it marked the end of the Soviet Union and the beginning of a globalized one world, in 1989, when that happened, there were 15 border walls in the world. Today, there are 77. So that's when the Zapatistas talk about a storm. These are examples. They have one final metaphor that they've been working these last few years, and that is of the cracks. The name of this network that we are a part of is called Sexta, Grietas del Norte. Sexta is sixth declaration that we heard of this morning. Grietas is cracks, del norte of the north. The metaphor the Zapatistas are working with for resistance is the metaphor of the crack, of the walls and the cracks. They're pointing out the rich are creating their own enclosed worlds, building massive walls. And they use those walls as a metaphor for the structure of the world, of this world. And so then for them, cracks are all of us in resistance. We're in rebellion. and rebellion, because rebellion for them is the no, and resistance is the yes. So what do you want? Those of us in rebellion, keep pounding at the wall, making those cracks, and don't stop, because once you stop, the cracks will heal. Take shifts if you have to. And also notice that it's a lot of different cracks, not just one movement, not just one way, a lot of different ways, in different locations, different geographies, different calendars, pounding those cracks on that wall. So then for our session today, our breakout groups, being that we are, and this encounter is called In, Against, and Beyond the Capitalist Hydra, the task that we'd like to suggest is to talk about what do we do when we're inside the Hydra, we're against the Hydra, and we want to go beyond the Hydra. I'll leave it there and open for questions. I will say so you don't get mad at me for scaring the shit out of you. Bettina gave me permission. She actually ordered me to scare the shit out of you. I've been holding a lot of this information for the last year and a half when the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, a very conservative group, said, shit, we have to all panic now. One of the most conservative groups on there said that. And I started to study it, and I started to tell some compas about it, and it was freaking them out. And so I didn't want to upset them. But it ended up, you can't hold it. It affects you. And so I was talking to Bettina yesterday. Bettina, I am holding all of this, and I don't want to scare people. And she said, no, you need to scare the shit out of everybody, because how else are we going to organize? And thinking about it in collective, in this kind of space where this is what we came to do, this might be the best kind of place for it. But I mentioned that because I'm under orders to scare the shit out of you, so don't get mad at me. And in fact, I agree with Bettina, like, if we know beforehand, we can actually organize. If we find out or do something about it when crisis hits us, wherever we are, then it's too late. But please go ahead. Any clarification, questions, or anything, please, I welcome that.
Thank you for your presentation. I wonder if you could elaborate on the solutions that Zapatistas and other indigenous people themselves present to the situation, and how their relationship with humans, nature, and the dichotomy, transcendent dichotomy would be one, which I believe in their visions.
Yes, thank you. So going back to this human-non-human split. Indigenous people, the Black radical tradition, is really excellent at this, in diagnosing this, and showing us that we can get out of this. So like the escape, like the slave runaway, for example, the maroon, which was mentioned earlier, the creation of a world outside of it while you're still in this one, and knowing when to take from this one to give to that one. That's a lot of what the Zapatistas do. So indigenous peoples, for example, something that I think about when I think about the human-non-human split, it's like the imposition of one way on us, like through colonialism, through the transatlantic slave trade. This seems to have been congealed. Imposing one world on us is with this idea that in order to understand each other as different, we immediately need to be in competition over who's superior and who's inferior. So then differences can't be respected under this framework, which is very heavy in Western philosophy, for lack of a better term. But it doesn't exist in many other cosmovisions. Like in Asia, for example, in Asian communities, the yin and the yang are differences that are complementary. This is also the case in Mesoamerican philosophy. Male and female are not binaries. There's male and there's female, and they walk together side by side. And there's fluidity between them, and if you don't like the category male-female, you create another category. You don't destroy possibilities of something else. There's a radical respect of difference in so many communities. What we usually fall into, though, is trying to assimilate. So if they call us non-human, if they tell us that we're not human, we do a lot to try to prove that we are. And so then what happens is that creates new differences. Like people of color or black, they tell us that we're nothing because of X, Y, Z. So then we do those X, Y, Z things, and to prove it, we then show, look, I'm not like those other people of color or those black people. So we create the new difference of the good black person, the bad black person, the good person of color, the bad person of color, the good migrant or immigrant, the bad immigrant, the good Muslim, the bad Muslim. And even within this human realm, there is a massive competition. So like white people competing over who's white enough. That's why we have, this term exists, white trash. There's massive competition within. Israel, for example, something that I study quite a bit is the Palestinian struggle. Jews, having been at the non-human level, rather than think of a different way to fashion liberation, decide to ask the above for a space there. And in order to do that, they needed to create their below, their other belows, which were the Palestinians or Arabs. And we're stuck in this. And this is what the Black radical tradition and indigenous movements are really great at, is diagnosing this and refusing it. Many of them. I'm not saying all of Black radical tradition or all indigenous movements at all. But the Zapatistas for sure, Fanon, and the Black Panthers in many, many ways, talking about the exit out. The exit out. And not just the exit out, but the understanding that there's already an outside. Sure, there may be one world that's dominating, but there's a lot of different worlds already existing. How can we enforce those? How can we reinforce those? How can we create a world where many worlds fit? This is the pluriverse idea of the Zapatistas that's really famous. A world where many worlds fit, not just one way, not just one world imposed on everybody that then doesn't respect difference. It instead annihilates difference, or it negates it, or absorbs it.
Thank you so much for coming. One of the things that I hear constantly about climate change is that it's a disaster, and as if the world isn't in constant flux or change. And so I'm wondering if the Zapatistas have lessons about meeting the land where it's at, and maybe how they or we can change with it, with climate, because there's no reversal. It'll just be this constant world of instability still to come. And I think capitalism wants to flatten everything and make it seem like we have a baseline when we actually never did. So what can you share, like, some more lessons about climate and a world of change?
Thank you. The Zapatistas in 2017 and 2018, together with Comparte. Comparte in Spanish is like a double entendre, doble sentido, for sharing and together with Compa and Art. They had also seminars where they invited scientists called conciencias, precisely like on this question. Like, we have a lot of traditional ancestral ways of being with the land, and a lot of those don't work anymore because things have drastically changed. And so they sought the support of scientists to come and work against capital rather than to work for it. They had 2 of those seminars. And it's something that we need to confront too, like living in urban context. There is a lot of heavy metal contaminants in the soil that our ancestors didn't have to deal with before. So there are new things that we have to figure out, and can't like go back and try to reverse to how things used to be, because the world has changed, and just confronting that is incredibly important and powerful.
Thank you so much, Kiki. So much better to be scared together, I think, than scared alone. So thank you for scaring us. My question is around like state solutions to climate change. Particularly, I think a lot about the Green New Deal, and I think the real lack of a critique of it that's really desperately needed. I mean, the original New Deal built the dams that are the reason that there are the salmon are dying, for example. So just wonder if you could speak to that, like the difference between that whole thing.
Thank you. Yeah, so the Green New Deal, the idea is to reduce carbon emissions while also creating jobs, recognizing that there are jobs on the line that, so for example, coal mining, for example. You can't just say no more coal and then all of these people become unemployed from the perspective of the state. And then the idea is to have more renewable energy. What's interesting, you'll learn this from Bettina's talk again, in the isthmus where she's from, where they're building that trans-isthmic corridor, before that, this new mega project that they're trying to force through, there is a wind energy project, because the winds in the isthmus are rated the highest category of the entire world. It's super, super windy there, and so they imposed windmills, which have been incredibly destructive, but it can call itself green. So maybe that's another ahead of the capitalist Hydra, is green capitalism, greening itself. And so what a lot of like the Green New Deal, it's not critiquing capital, it's not critiquing our way, it's just critiquing fossil fuels more than anything. And so then what happens a lot of the time is, in order for some to be able to live a green life, the life of others has to continue to be destroyed, which is the exact same logic of the last 500 years.
Creo que me toca a mí. Quería preguntarte sobre el concepto de grieta. Quizás una forma de que no evitar como espantarse y enojarse. Creo que es muy importante. Estoy de acuerdo que hay que hacerlo lo más profundamente posible, pero quizás puede ser acompañado con profundizar también el concepto de grieta. No sé exactamente cómo, no sé si has pensado también un poco más sobre las grietas, quizás hacer una cartografía de las grietas, quizás como entender más el concepto de grieta, profundizar, porque ahí de alguna manera estaría como la posible, como, pues si no solución, por lo menos la manera colectiva de enfrentar toda esta tremenda destrucción que viene desde arriba. Entonces, nomás la pregunta sería ¿cuál sería tu idea de las grietas, o cómo piensas que las grietas han sido o deben ser como también profundizados en el análisis?
I think that the CNI and the CIG are a really great example of those cracks, of grietas. In that what brings them together is a common point of defending life, and they struggle in their different geographies, in their different ways, as a bunch of different cracks. And I think that it's really worth studying tonight. La compañera Inés, when she's with Bettina, she'll be presenting with Bettina. She's going to show us a book that she helped co-edit with a lot of voices from the SIC, that the different chapters seem to me to be really great examples of different cracks. Right now the book is just in Spanish, but we're trying to translate it into English. Whoever wants to be part of the translation team, hit me up. Because I think translation work is a really big part of that work as well. Sadly, English is a homogenizing language, and how can we use it against that is maybe amplify the voices of those who aren't spread out, like their ideas aren't spread out as much, because maybe those ideas can inspire others, and it's not at all to have them be copied, but to at least recognize you're not alone. There's other people doing stuff. And then also, what can you share? Maybe there's something that you're doing that can inspire other folks. So this is like that idea of those networks. So the networks of these little nodes being those cracks that keep pounding on that wall. But yeah, I agree. It's important to deepen those understandings, and I think that that's the work of study and accompanying movement. Should we break that into groups? Do we have time to break that into groups? I find that. Yeah. Oh, we have one more. Okay.
This is a clarifying question. I don't know if I missed it, but what were the cracks like in capitalism? Like if there was any analysis on that, I might have missed that. Or yeah, that's my question. Thank you.
So an example of a crack. The Zapatistas, for example. So in talking about this formulation that keeps us this way, is exiting out of it, creating something else. What is that something else that doesn't reproduce it? The Zapatistas and the CNI are trying to do that through their 7 principles, which you can see on the wall there. Everything that they do is guided through principles, which are ways of relating to each other, because this is a social relation. It's a relation of domination. So they are trying to create something new with different relations. For example, propose and not impose. Build and not destroy. Serve, not serve oneself. And of course, they do it all through mandar obedeciendo, which is lead by obeying. So being below and not trying to be above. So this is a big difference between the left from above and the left from below. The left from above wants to impose one way, dominate. They've created a left from below that is in the left part being anti-capitalist and also not xenophobic and being able to share the world with someone who isn't you. Share the world across differences. And the way that they've concretely done that, the Zapatistas and the SIG, is by creating their own worlds. And we saw examples of that in the first presentation of, they've created their own government that follows those principles. They've created their own schools, their own clinics. It sounds a lot like the Black Panthers. And it's really important to say that because we're in Oakland, you know? This is autonomy, and recognizing that autonomy is very much based on the materiality of the world, together with the spirituality and our emotional selves, and it's holistic, it's everything. And what they've done is, in creating that government, they're creating it in order to make the existing government irrelevant. They don't accept anything from the Mexican state. To be Zapatista, you do not accept anything. You create it yourself in collective. The expansion of that has been the SIG, expanding it beyond Chiapas, throughout Mexico, and we have SIG counselors here in the United States, one in Boston, one in LA, so expanding it beyond borders, you know. And so it's a really sophisticated understanding of the ways, the logics of the world, and then creating a different logic. And that's important, so that it's not just about appearances, but it's about the way that we're relating. So they're super, super worth reading. That book, Critical Thought in the Face of the Capitalist Hydra, I mentioned earlier, when the Zapatistas use the word rebellion, they use that to say what they're against, and when they use the word resistance, they use that to affirm what they do. That book has a lot of examples of the way that they resist. The Zapatista textbooks from the little school, which you can find on Radio Zapatista, and there's English translations as well, and we'll put them up on our website as we're developing the education section. Super, super concrete. They've created their own banks, for example. They have their own economies, their own cooperatives. Women have their own banks. Women have their own cooperatives. And they participate in government. They have their own laws. They have their own conflict resolution. So it's like the literal construction of that other world. Does that help answer your... This will be the last one, and we'll wrap it up for groups.
It's not really a question, but I did feel like this was a good time to say that if anyone is looking to really get into some deep study about how capitalism works, and I think that understanding how capitalism really works is helpful for understanding where the cracks are. The Autonomous University of Political Education is a left from below learning cooperative, learning community. We have 15-week courses online that talk about how capitalism works, how it relates to everything from like racism and sexism to climate change, and actually this human, non-human binary is also a part of it. And we're extremely inspired by autonomous projects like the Zapatistas, the Black Panthers in Rojava in northern Syria. If that, that's sort of where our politics are. So if folks are wanting to sign up for a course with the Autonomous University of Political Education, a 15-week online course, totally free, we'll have a sign-up sheet over here if people want more knowledge on how it all works and all that.
Thanks. Thank you for that. Thank you. So we'll break out into our groups, and then we'll reconvene in about 15 minutes.